Praise Yahweh for the wonderful Sabbath day. I'm sure that everybody looks forward to the wonderful Sabbath day, especially at this time period where Yahweh has ramped up the perfecting of His saints. But if you'll notice, the type of perfection that Yahweh is expecting from us is now the type of perfection that Yahweh is. Okay, so we could talk a little bit about when Yahweh called us into His house, and there was, as Pastor showed in the Mark of the Beast and in so many other books, that Yahweh gave a piece of Himself. He said, if you're reading this and you're understanding this, you're being called. And the only reason why we would be called out at that time is not because we did so many wonderful works and Yahweh said, oh, I gotta have Him in my house. He is so awesome. Look at how He could just hustle and bustle. I gotta get Him in my house. Okay? If we look back and reflect on our experiences before we came to the house of Yahweh, we will be desperately honest with ourselves in saying, no, I did nothing to come into the house of Yahweh. And that's why Yahweh refers to it as an undeserved pardon. We were pardoned according to Yahweh's plan and not according to our works. Okay, but remember, judgment begins when we come into the house of Yahweh. As soon as we began this walk in the way of Yahweh, judgment began for us. And the end result will be that we will be rewarded according to our works at that point in time. We were not rewarded according to our works by coming into the house of Yahweh. That was something that Yahweh planned. He set in motion. And He didn't call us into His house to lord over people, but He called us into His house to be servants to all of creation. Okay, to be made in the image and likeness of Yahweh. So what you see right now, what we're experiencing right now is, what is your will? What desire do you have? What intent? What's your honest intent? Yahweh brought us the peaceful solution. And the peaceful solution is showing us that we must stop, think, and consider all of our options, okay? People who study, rehearse the way of Yahweh, they start to realize the amount of options that they really have. Okay, there's an individual who can identify a number of options. There's two types of people, okay? Not only two types of people, but what I'm saying is there's some of us who only come up with one or two options to any particular situation or circumstance. But then there's others, those who have given themselves to the word of Yahweh and to reading and to understanding and to seeking Yahweh, being honest with themselves. Okay, being honest with yourself first and foremost. Those individuals come up with even more options. Okay, there's the peaceful solution shows us that there's always a better way. Okay, you could always do whatever it is that you're doing, you could always do better. Okay, so like, in some instances I'll have some of my counselees and, they'll tell me, well, Kahan, I did the best. I tried my best. And, to me, that statement doesn't go over too well with me. I tried my best, but I failed. It doesn't go over too well with me. Because if we're trying our best, we won't fail. That's period, point blank. If you try your best, you're not going to fail. When Pastor said to us, praise Yahweh, look, when Pastor said to us, it's not what you overcome, it's the effort that you put into it. Look, I don't know how many people know what a double entendre is, okay? But it's like a parable, okay? It's like a parable. When he uttered those words to us, he actually put more pressure on the saints of Yahweh than we ever had. Some of us thought, well, man, praise Yahweh. Whew. Man, when he said that, I felt like, with a breath of fresh air. But Yahweh was putting more pressure on us at that particular point, because what he was saying was, you got to put in this effort. It's not going to be a cakewalk. It's not going to be a walk in the park. Okay, this overcoming is you were never, Pastor said, you were never promised a bed of roses. Never. Okay, there was Yahweh's calling, when Yahweh gave us a portion of himself. If you understand what Yahweh's initial calling is, it's him giving a portion of himself to you. It's a portion of his zeal. Because if you remember, when we came into the house of Yahweh, it was like nothing was going to stop us from getting here. You dropped everything. You know, so many of us have stories of the things that we left behind in the dust in order to get to Yahweh's house, in order to reverence Yahweh at his house. Okay? So that level of zeal came from Yahweh. It didn't come from ourselves. It came from Yahweh himself. Yahweh invested a portion of his spirit, which is holy, into us at that particular time. When we came into his house, he then said, now you water it. Okay? Now you water it. And Yahweh brings forth the yield. Of course, we know the scriptures is plain. You see, but it's according to our efforts. Some will bring forth tenfold, some 20, some 30, some 40, some 50, but it's only because of the level of effort. Pastor said we're all here to be teachers, but it depends upon your, effort, yes, but there's 2 A's. What were they? Attitude and aptitude. And attitude and aptitude denote effort. Okay, if we look into the responsibility unit of the Peaceful Solution Care, and I always mention this because this is one of the things that I work on the most, is striving to be responsible or able to respond for every action that I perform. And, we know that a responsible individual will do things according to the time that they were given, according to the instructions that they were given, and with a right attitude. And remember, I always say, to me, the most important out of those is the right attitude. Because you can shipwreck your own faith just because of the attitude. Just because of what the attitude, whatever, you've convinced yourself, however you've convinced yourself. You remember the parable that Yahshua Messiah showed concerning the talents. When the one servant, went and said, hey, I got your talent right here. I knew you to be a rough and harsh individual, reaping where you have not sown, and all of these horrible things, all these rumors that he heard about his ruler. Yahshua Messiah didn't say, oh, no, it wasn't true. He didn't say that to him. He didn't say, and the ruler, exclaiming to his servant, those words are not true, then further said, no, he didn't say that. What he did say is, if you thought I was such a harsh ruler, and if you thought I was so unjust, why didn't you just do what I told you to do? You're in my power right now. You're in my hands. Why didn't you just follow your instructions? You really, actually, if I'm as rough and as harsh as you say that I am, you took your life into your own hands by doing what you just did and not following these instructions. Okay, so the attitude is very, very, very important. Okay? All of these things are, in order to help us in our preparation toward this time period that Yahweh has set in front of us. And it's just like what we saw last Sabbath with all the speakers, the men speaking. 12:24 is for Yahweh's people. Okay, it's 12:24 is for Yahweh's people to really turn up their game. Okay, to really turn the heat up, and to really check ourselves and ask questions. Ask yourself questions. But when you're asking yourself questions, you have to be two things. You have to be critical. You have to critique yourself, because there's a reason why the scripture says it's a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living Father. Okay? You critique yourself, but you also have to be honest. Okay? One of the steps to ending all wars is admitting when you were wrong. But in order to admit when we're wrong, we have to know the standard. If we don't know the standard, how are you going to admit to it? If we don't know what our conduct, what manner of man we ought to be, how are we going to admit to it? Okay, so this goes back to the amount of options that an individual who gives themselves to reading, as we were admonished by Yahshua Messiah to do. Give yourself to reading. And then uplift your brothers and encourage your brothers all the more as you see the time approaching. Okay, this is what our duty is. And the only way we're going to be able to do that is to know the standard, what Yahweh expects of us. If we don't know what Yahweh expects to us, we can't meet that mark. Okay, so we're going to pick up on page 140. It's going to be chapter 13. There's a lot of things that that are occurring in this chapter that we could draw exact parallels with what's occurring right now in the world. Just recently, I don't know if all of you have been up to date with what's been going on concerning the elections and Russia, the allegations that Russia hacked into or tampered with the results. But if you hear the words that our great president has been utilizing concerning this topic, you could definitely see, that this, usually in politics, politicians really strive to be diplomatic. They strive to be cordial, even with those who they have problems with. And recently, it seems to be less and less of the case. There's in Revelations it speaks about a particular spirit that goes into the politicians, goes into the politicians. And I think that there's a spirit of frustration, there's a spirit of division. Of course, there's always been a spirit of division in the system, but there's a spirit of agitation. There's a type of agitation that's fallen upon everybody, but you can see it in the politicians. You can see it, and the way that they react in particular ways. So Barack Obama has been saying certain things just recently that I would say comes out of a level of frustration, and a level of agitation, but we know that the only way that he can have an effective, just like what Pastor said, you remember, Pastor said, no man, and I'm going to quote him loosely, no man can govern, no man is equipped to be president of the United States unless they go through, and this is some other quotes that he made, unless they go through the Peaceful Solution Character Education program first. Otherwise, you're just given to your whims, and that's what we see here recently. But we're going to, right here, this is chapter 13, on page 140, it says, Barack Obama talks of crusades. The House of Yahweh shows when they will stop. Okay, number one. So the house of Yahweh shows when they will stop, number one. And Pastor says, Shalom, everyone. Man, where'd y'all come from? We've got a full house. Praise Yahweh. All the way back to the back, too. Let's go. And everybody screams hallelujah, Yahweh, and praise Yahweh. And then he gives us his peace. He says, may the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. Verse 2, he says, I would hate to be in the Pope's shoes right now. Poor thing. All his people are leaving him. It's going to get worse. The great falling away. If anyone wants to read about it, you can. Yahweh's clapping his hands too up there. Did you hear that? Praise Yahweh. We recognized it, Yahweh. I think there was a roll of thunder at that particular time or something like that, if I remember correctly. Verse 3. I had world military spending. It's not going down either. $1.7 trillion. I think our great Deacon Tovia Grenovich Hawkins has got more on that for you. But it's $1.7 trillion now in warships, nuclear bombs, and you name it. I don't want to get ahead of myself here. I've got some announcements I've got to do. Let's see. Particularly of the House of Yahweh. The popularity of the House of Yahweh is growing. If I could find it here, I think it's in. He says, we were about 3 on Google last week. We were down to 6, but this article came out. This news article that we released this week, Yisrayl Hawkins calls on all religions to wake up and make drastic changes to end suffering in newsletter. Pastor at House of Yahweh. It says, go down to verse 5. Pope Francis, you need to change religions. Let's see. What do I want? Let's see. Do I want this? No, this is Pastor talking to himself. But I thought that was pretty neat. Yahweh opened doors to the people. Let's go down to verse 8. If Yahweh is willing, I think he is, we're going to have 3 days of feasting. This is the wonderful feast of Pentecost. Which means we need help at the cafeteria. So there's always work to be done at Yahweh's house. Remember, the scripture shows that the laborers are few for this particular work. Let's go over to verse 11. I would have had taken a picture of that moving picture. Let's go down to verse 13. While Circes helped them along, the Circes means help them along, and Circes means church. That's where they got the word church. Congregation, gathering, a gathering up of dead bodies. She'd take them, and now mythology says she turned her enemies into pigs. Her enemies were the House of Yahweh followers. They were ones who were following Yahshua and his disciples. They were killed by the thousands. Some history says billions were killed. And of course, when you think about the Crusades, you think of the particular time period, okay? And how long the Crusades, the many Crusades, there wasn't just one. There was many Crusades initiated by the Catholic Church. And you can definitely see how billions of people can be killed. And this crusade is continuing up until today. So Pastor says here in verse 14, the Muslims who came later from the scriptures, the Muslims, they had a little bit of knowledge, still do. And several other groups besides them had a little bit of knowledge. And that's what you see today. You know, there are plenty of groups that have a specific amount of knowledge. Okay, but they don't have the fullness of the knowledge of Yahweh. Okay? They don't have the fullness of the knowledge of Yahweh. I'll give you an example. There's a lot of groups, of course, there's a lot of groups that use the name Yahweh. And then there's a lot of groups that use the term Yahweh. But the term Yahweh is a verb, is the verb expression, the verbal expression of the name Yahweh. Okay, so the term Yahweh you would use in a sentence. Okay, it denotes I will surely do. So if an individual made up his mind to do a particular thing, he would use that word in his sentence. If they were speaking Hebrew, they would use that word in their sentence, Yahweh. Okay, now we know that the name Yahweh means I am whom I have chosen to be, or I am righteous because I have chosen to be righteous. And so that shows his determination, right? And so that's why that term Yahweh denotes the sureness of performing, but it's a verb. Okay, it's a verb. The noun of that term is Yahweh, which is the name. Okay, so but you can see how it's easy for the translators, and not only the translators, the world scholars, to get confused, because they will see the pronunciation of the name of the word or of the phrase Yahweh. They will see that, and it'll be put in a particular context to where they'll say, okay, well, this must be the name. But the pronunciation of the name is actually the noun expression, which is Yahweh. Okay, the verb, the expression of the verb is Yahweh. That means I will do. Okay, I've made up my mind to perform. Okay, so, but you can see how these ones, they have these little bits and pieces of information, and they go off on what they think that they know. Okay, but the only organization, of course, you guys already know what I'm going to say, the only organization that has the ability to offer up the right and true translation, to rightly divide between the words of righteousness, is the House of Yahweh at Abel, led by Abel. Pastor says, I was reading about one this week, the difference between them and the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church hated them because they believed in a resurrection. They believed in righteousness versus evil and death. With the Catholics, you never die, they say. That's a lie. That's a lie that Satan told in the beginning. And the Savior called her a liar and says she lies about everything. Okay, Yahshua made it plain. Let's go over to verse 16. Well, the history of the religion now, it's being brought out by the president about the Crusades. And he's bringing out some. He didn't bring out much. Of course, in his position, he can't really say too much. We have covered much more than he had, and suffering some of the hatred that we have suffered because of telling the truth. Because there was a backlash when he mentioned about the crusade. There was a pretty sizable backlash coming at him. But everything we put out, we can back up with history. And they know it, so they don't challenge us. Because if they challenge us, we would present in court, in their courts, here's where we got it from. They wrote most of this themselves. So it's not the House of Yahweh writing these things. It's their own writings, their own teachers. Well, when did all this persecution or crusades start? They started a long time ago, before they admit it in history. They say 410 to 430 CE, which of course is AY. Well, they're lacking of a few thousand years. They're getting their history in. Why did it start? What will stop it? We know, and we're going to tell it. Okay? Go down to verse 19. And do not forget to take your honey immediately before you go to bed. Remember, it was the honey and the cinnamon. Your liver, if you take a tablespoon of honey before you go to bed, your liver will latch onto the honey. The honey and the butter you shall eat. Remember that. And salt. Take the salt and the sugar. Sugar, yes. That's what the doctors give you when you get rid of those things out of your body, and you go to the hospital. They start supplying you with a solution of salt and sugar. Don't forget sugar. Don't forget the sugar. Don't forget the honey. But your liver will latch onto the honey if you take it the last thing before you go to bed, just a tablespoonful, and it will heal itself with that honey. It uses it to heal itself. Most people get trouble because they get cirrhosis of the liver. And of course, that cirrhosis of the liver is caused by, you should know by now, STDs. Yes, they're actually bringing this out now. The scientists are proving, yes, it's caused by STDs. So is cancer. Cancer is caused by STDs. As a matter of fact, they've just recently, I'll say recently, probably within the last year and a half, they've been able to identify cancer beginning from one particular fungus, okay, a specific fungus that, again, it just matters where that fungus decides to rest, and that's where the cancer will come from. Okay, but these things are allowed and permitted by the STDs. If you remember previously when Pastor was talking about free range chickens or free roaming chickens, and he said that the male bird was there to implant the germ, a particular germ, into the eggs, okay, which makes it healthy, which balances out the cholesterol and everything like that. Well, everything has that microbial beginning, okay, where it begins at the microbial state. And this is why we can definitely say that cancer is an STD, something that's passed on through sexual misconduct, because of the ability for that fungus, that germ, to be transmitted from one individual to another individual. What did I tell you for 40 years before they told you? This is a wonderful thing. I was trying to think of a man's name, Lester Williams. He was a member of the House of Yahweh, and he came here when we were still at the old sanctuary in town on T&P. He was 90-something years old. To see him dance around with Great Khan Benaya's music box, you'd think he was much younger than that. But he sold me on raw peanut butter because he stayed at my place and I took care of him. He just went around picking up rocks and cleaning up the land. He just did what he wanted to do. I didn't care. I was just glad to be around the man. But he wanted raw peanut butter. And if you remember, he said that he always had that roasted raw peanut butter, and he encouraged us to make sure to have it refrigerated. Anyway, I said to the man, this is verse 23, I said the man is 93 years old, and that's his number one food. And the guy said, I don't think we can agree with that. So he went ahead and I don't think we can argue with that, okay? So 93 years old, and that's his most liked food. This is when Pastor went to a little town just to the southeast of Clyde. I would say probably about 45 minutes away. That they still do raw peanut butter over there. Okay, they'll actually grind it up for you right in front of you, and let you be on your way. Still till this day. Okay, it says, let's go over to verse 26. These were his sermons. Okay, so this is speaking of Yachanan. Pastor's going through, when the Pope tried to take and change and confuse the people into believing that the laws of Yahweh were done away with. If you look in verse 25, it said they had four different religions at that particular time. The Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and Herodians, those were the ones who reigned in Jerusalem. Well, John was arrested. Yachanan is his true name. His true name was Yachanan. And they cut off his head for telling Herod that he was going to go to hell if he didn't repent of his sins. And that's what he was saying. These were his sermons. Repent. This is what Yachanan harped on. Repent. I'm telling you myself when he said, I'm telling you myself what he said. But he said, there's one coming after me who's going to carry fire with him. Right? He said, I baptize with water, but this one who's coming, he baptizes with the flame. Okay? With that judgment. He's going to be your judge. That one is now the high priest over the house of Yahweh. He's Yahshua, who was prophesied of. Yes, praise Yahweh. Yahshua was actually prophesied in Genesis 4. Genesis 4, again, in Genesis 49. Okay? Remember, the one whom acquires the scepter, the one who receives the scepter after those who have it have finished their misuse of it. Okay? If you remember, I showed you how Yada was the lawgiver. Okay? Yada is the lawgiver up until today. Yada is the lawgiver, those who have taken this commission by force. Okay? He is the lawgiver, and it was given to him by Father Yahweh, to reign and to rule and to be the one to make decisions and issue his corrupt judgment. The Levites, they're the ones it was turned over to. Remember, the Levites, I'm a Levite, my mother and my father both were Levites. They trace back to the tribe of Levi. Several others here are Levites. Many of you are Levites. Yahshua, he actually was bred and born living a sinless life. Now, get this. Listen closely to me. He lived, he was born, he was bred to be sinless by his mother and his father, who taught him before he was born, because the scriptures were read to him while he was yet in the womb. His mother, the same, by his mother, the same of Yachanan, but Yahshua lived a sinless life. Now Yahweh didn't have to pull Yahshua out of sin, but he showed that we, you and I, can actually have in the future. He showed what you and I can actually have in the future. We can have children that will never sin. Okay, you can have children that will never sin. What he was showing you, that's what he was proving to you. Yahshua was proving, or Yahweh was proving through Yahshua Messiah, that we can have children that will never ever sin. But that takes a huge administration. Okay, that takes a level of diligence and vigilance that everybody has to be adhered to. Okay, you can't. A child won't be able to realize that potential left up to the parents alone. Okay, there has to be a whole community of like-minded individuals to fulfill this commission of bringing forth what Pastor called the atonement. And the atonement was that righteousness that was bred into the children. Okay, that's what the atonement was, that we are commissioned to bring forth. Verse 30. And you children hear, when you get married, a man shall leave his father and his mother. Let me repeat that. A man shall leave his father and his mother. Can you hear that? He shall cling to his wife, and they two will be in unity. They too will be in unity with Yahweh's laws. Well, that is possible. It's possible to do, and they can bring forth children who are in unity. Yahweh showed us that. Okay? They can bring forth these children to bring forth that atonement. Okay? Let's go down to verse 33. But the one who opposes Babylon is a sinner who was pulled out of deep, dark sin. Okay? He's a sinner who was pulled out of deep, dark sin. That sin was partly responsible for the Catholic Church following Satan. And what we're seeing today is we're seeing crusades today, the same as it was back in the early days in history. It started in Genesis and chapter 4. That's where your crusades started. It's plain as day. Anyone who taught Yahshua, who was able, was hated. Anyone who taught Yahshua, who was able, was hated with an automatic hatred that came from Satan herself. So the same way that Yahweh inspired us and called us and gave a portion of himself in order to bring us into his house is the same way that Satan influences these people. And you'll find that they will do things directed toward you and not even be aware, not even know that, hey, this was the totally wrong thing to do. Or starting for some reason to gossip or to show hatred toward you. These are the things that the world does to those who follow in Yahweh's righteousness just because of that, because they follow after the standard of Yahweh. Verse 34, Yahweh showed the two genes there, the many genes that were brought forth, and they were brought in Adam and Eve, both of them. And they came out in two different men there. And the people think, these were just boys. No, they were 140 something years old. Okay? They weren't 14. They were 140 something years old and 128 years old or so. They'd been living and having children, and the earth was pretty much the land. That land and area there was pretty much populated. And yes, the children were being born by leaps and bounds, by healthy people who lived long ages at that time too. But in the Crusades, if you remember, the Catholic Church, they were going down at one time, and then they started a force, a real force. They created them an army, as Daniel said. This was the roving army, and it was in the day of the prophets. Stephen said to them, the deacon Stephen, a deacon, this man was so up to date with the scriptures that these learned lawyers could not stand up to him. but they didn't study the scriptures. These learned lawyers, if you remember, they studied the same thing that Gamaliel taught to the apostle Shaul. It was a different set of traditions that were taught. And one of them was you couldn't use the name Yahweh. Okay, you could not use the name Yahweh. These were the traditions. So this shows you what type of traditions, what type of teaching that these individuals were following. Okay, that they lacked so much understanding that they didn't even realize that the law of Yahweh says you must take the oath by the name of Yahweh. How can you do it if you can't call upon the name of Yahweh? Okay, so their understanding just went further and further away from them. So when they heard you using the name Yahweh, it was automatic in Shaul's mind that you were blaspheming and you did his God and he did his God an honor by killing you. And Shaul said it himself. He said nobody was as zealous. Look, when I set out to get these people, round them up and bring them back to Jerusalem for judgment and then take them beyond Babylon, I did it with the most zeal. Read up on Shaul. He said it plainly. You know, and he was known, well known in the area. Okay, the politicians and the leaders, they all knew him. You know, at one point when he was giving his account of his calling, one of the rulers said, man, you know, Shaul, you almost convinced me to follow after your God. You almost convinced me, but I ain't doing it. Because they thought Shaul was insane for giving up his position. Such a position of power and might, revered and feared, and you just let go of it to dwell in caves? Surely you're mad. You have to be insane. Okay? So these are the things that Shaul was going through. Okay? Now we're going to go through verse 38. When I get to 39, there's some things that Pastor is pointing out here. But verse 38. Well, today now the Catholic Church is going to make a big move. She's being forced to. She's saying to the world leaders, we need to resurrect the Roman Empire. Well, why? They're making it look like their spiel is great. And they have a selling form of propaganda that they're dishing out to these nations. And this is no different from today. You know, we have to keep these words in mind, because when we see the things that are going on with Donald Trump, you know, the president-elect Donald Trump, with his incoming cabinet, and all the things that are being lined up right now, don't think that it's without the instruction and guidance and direction of the Catholic Church. Okay? We can't forget that, even though, you know, the media will put their focus on particular things and particular agendas and particular this, that, the other thing. We can't forget what Pastor showed here, because he said, their spiel is great. Okay? You remember what the scripture says, that even if it were possible, even the very elect would be deceived. Now, of course, that's not what we're talking about here with the politicians, but it's the same caliber, okay? It's the same type of teaching. They use that propaganda in order to push their point and to yield their particular results. But he said they have a selling form of propaganda. In other words, it makes it seem very viable, you know, when they say, oh, well, you know, Russia is the one that hacked into the, you know, we know this whole system, everything is calculated, they have everything lined up. Okay, Pastor said when they do it, they're going to do it according to their desires. The only thing is that they're going to lose control. They're going to lose the control that they thought that they were gaining. And that's what's going to bring this nuclear cataclysm. Okay, so they're dishing out this propaganda to the nations. There are some articles I want to read, but I don't have the time to read them to you. But Russia now. The Pope is going to visit Russia. If you've been up to date with the news as it comes out over on the Sabbaths, you'll know that at this particular time when the Pope he was supposed to go visit Russia, okay, but the powers on that side of the story, who remember what Malachi Martin said, those powers on that side of the story kind of shook their head at that decision there. So he never actually went. But when it came time for the president of Russia to go see the Pope, if you remember, he had him waiting for like 15, 20 minutes and then he just kind of sauntered in and shook his hand and took the pictures and everything and left, because there's a whole nother movement on that side. And you remember, this kingdom is divided. They're not in unity at all, and they do fight among each other, including the quartet. We already know the quartet. They're fighting and biting and devouring each other. Okay? But this is what we see here. Even with what we're being shown with the incoming administration, there's a division between China and Russia where it concerns the president-elect Donald Trump. Okay, China is very upset with Donald Trump right now, whereas Russia is goo-goo-eyed and in love with this guy. But this again shows the contrast between the two. But what Pastor shows here is, he says he's going to try again to persuade Russia, that the Pope is going to try again to persuade Russia. Now, all of this hacking talk, I mean, consider it. What if it's just part of that persuasion? And one of the things, because remember, they have peace through war, right? And what you'll notice at this particular time, Malachi Martin said that it's a three-way fight, okay? That three-way fight has quickly turned into a two-way fight between the Catholic Church and Russia. And even that's debatable, okay? But what we see right now is the United States doing the bidding of the Catholic Church. There's no, that portion there, that argument there is no longer there. Okay, that argument between the Catholic Church and the U.S. is no longer there. Now, because you remember, NATO is the Pope's army. Okay, but who has say and sway over NATO? America, the U.S. Okay, so these are they're in bed together. Okay, but what Pastor showed here is that now the Pope is going to visit Russia. Okay, he's going to try again to persuade Russia. This lesson right here was over a year ago that Pastor gave. Okay, but right now what we see with the words that Barack Obama is using in warning Russia, okay, and it's almost like he was reading something that he was told to say, because the way he said it was like, hey, if they do it to us, we're going to do it to them, and they're the only people who are going to know what he said was a loose quote again. Some things are going to be out in the open. Other things are not going to be so out in the open. And the only other people who are going to know what occurred was Russia. Man, I think somebody wrote something for him to, they told him to say these particular things. But this is part of that persuasion. The Pope is like, look, we can make life very hard for you. But you see, the thing is, the Russians are not moving. The Orthodox Church, There's some nice little talking and little cordial, going in between the two of them. But if you remember the 10 kings that we see so much now, and there were 4 that didn't show up. One of them was the Russian delegation. And, I would definitely, because if you look at who else, and I don't remember the names, I had the names previously, the areas, but if you look at the other 3, 2 out of those 3 are closely tied to Russia. Okay, so you can see who had the sway in that conversation right there. Okay, but Pastor goes on to show that the Pope is doing things like recognizing the Palestinian state, and of course these things are pomp and pageantry, to make it look like he really cares about the poor. The things that the Jews are doing to the Palestinians right now is incredible, because Hitler just did the same thing. But of course we do know through the teachings of Pastor that was Jew on Jew crime. Right? Okay. Verse 45. If you remember, in Israel, this went on. The tribes, when they left Samuel and got kings, they wanted a king. Well, all of them didn't want the same king, so other kings got to fighting their battles for them. And they all wanted to be protected or to build a tower so they wouldn't be scattered. This particular group would not be scattered. They'd be their own group. When it says, they're finding out now that didn't work. All they created was a bunch of continual war. And this is what we see today, continual war. When Barack Obama came into office, he had all of these grand schemes to, shut down this area over here and bring all our troops home. And he found out how hard that is to actually do. Okay, because there's much more going on than what meets the eye. And it's only the House of Yahweh that could truly explain what's going on. There's an element that people forget, and that element is Satan herself. Okay, and when you go down from Satan, you get to the Catholic Church. Okay, and now all the powers that are entangled in there. Of course, we've heard of the Rothschilds and the Bilderbergs and all of these individuals that are entangled in the whole Catholic Church hegemony. Okay. Further down at the bottom of or in the middle of verse 46, it said, "He said, I'm going to spread you out into all countries. There I will scatter you." Well, it wasn't him. He was just predicting this is what's going to be. This is what's going to occur. I'm going to allow it to occur. That because of the disunity, you will be scattered. Because you wanted kings who would not rule according to Yahweh's way. Because there's nothing wrong with a king. Okay? There's nothing wrong with having a king. It's according to Yahweh's law to have kings. But what does the king have to do? He has to acquire for himself a book of the law from the priests and read it once a week. Every single day is the commission of a king. And so when the children of Israel, remember when Samuel was all brokenhearted, I can't believe they don't want Yahweh. They were like, Yahweh was like, no, this is not about a king, or, because remember when Samuel brought it to Yahweh, Yahweh was like, yeah, let them have a king. There's nothing wrong with having a king. The problem is, this king will not follow my laws. Okay, this king will not follow my standards. So I want you to go back and tell them exactly what's going to occur. So when it occurs, it's right to say, I told you so. There's nothing right. You hear the saying in the world, well, I hate to say it to you, but no, this is righteousness. I told you so. If you are teaching righteousness, it is right to tell individuals that, yes, you were told. Yahshua Messiah said the exact same thing. Okay? Had I not told you, okay, he said it a little bit different, but that's, I told you so. Had I not come and told you these things, you would not have had your sin revealed. That's, I told you so. There's nothing wrong with I told you so, so let's not get, all upset at everything with I told you so. Okay, in righteousness. We have a few minutes here. Okay, let's go over to, we're going to finish up on page 147. And then, of course, your homework will be to read the rest of the chapter in preparation for the next class. But on verse 58, well, Yahweh can foretell the future. Okay, he is in full control. He's going to bring his house through. He is going to bring his house through. He's going to protect you just like he said he would. 12:24. 12:24. He's going to protect you just like he said that he would. And just try to tell yourself, if you want to see how great Yahweh is, he prophesied the increase in knowledge for this time period. He prophesied the nuclear bomb for this time period. He prophesied the nuclear war for this time period. That's going to darken the sun, and that's what the Pope is relying on right there. He wants to cause that change for his benefit. And they're talking nuclear war right now, nuclear war with China. And even some of the news media are giving reports of politicians saying the United States is trying to provoke them into, that is Russia, into nuclear war. Now don't think that this is changing because we have the president-elect who's friendly and doing a number of things, like I believe it's the foreign minister is a buddy of the Russians. The Russians were so glad when he was named. I can't remember his name, but when he took his office in Donald Trump's, President-elect Donald Trump's cabinet. Don't think that this heat is seemingly cooling down, because that's the way it looks. It looks like the heat between the U.S. and the Russia is cooling down with this president coming in, but let's not fool ourselves, because there's someone bigger pushing these buttons. So they're trying to get Russia into a nuclear war. Russia is standing calm, though. And you could even see it with these allegations of the hacking. They just shrugged that off. The Russians were just like, oh, that is just so silly. Why would we do something as silly as that? If they did it, they're not going to admit it. Okay? They're not going to admit it. But nonetheless, they are shrugging it off, just like what Pastor said right there. They're just keeping calm. Because they know that they have power also. Okay? But what Yahweh is going to do, he's going to protect all of us, and he's going to show that he can protect his house and will. Praise Yahweh. If everyone